It's not Fast and Furious West Coast Swing. No, that's the parody video I need to see. Somebody make it. Hello and welcome to another zany episode of Nerdy West Coast Swing, the podcast with pixels where the anchors are out of this world and the points don't matter. We are here to help train your eyes so you can learn faster and dance better. I'm Cassie Winter.
I'm Alicia Marshall. If you're wondering who are we to be analyzing these pros, Cassie and I both have extensive training and experience in both partnered and solo dancing. Cassie has about 24 years and I have about 26. So tonight we are talking about Benji Schwimmer and Emily Huang. And we are talking about some kind of energy and how to manage that. That's kind of the topic of tonight.
Yep. Before I drop the link in the chat for everyone to go watch the video, just a quick heads up, I will be live and in person at Swingtacular, the Galactic Open. Ask me if I prefer Star Wars or Star Trek. We will never stop talking. That is what will result in that question. And Alicia is going to be live and in person in Portland, Oregon, even though that's where I live. She will be here. So excited, but she'll be here for 2 weeks and will be available also for lessons. So we're both available for lessons in person at these dates and times.
Yes.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and drop the link in the chat. Go ahead and give it a watch. When you're done, we'll get to analyzing. Such a beautiful dance.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I really appreciate, and it's like topical because we're talking about energy, is for this kind of song that has like a really powerful emotional through line in the melody. It's really easy to get into that cycle of like, we've got so much energy bouncing around. You never get a chance to breathe or to pause or to reset.
Yeah.
But in this dance, they're constantly taking moments to breathe, pause, reset, and come back to the baseline. Yeah. Overall, they're still escalating throughout the whole dance, but it's not Fast and Furious West Coast Swing. No, that's the parody video I need to see. Somebody make it.
That's funny. Okay, so I think the main thing I wanted to focus on tonight is just kind of looking at the energy that Benji is giving Emily, because he is in certain spots giving her a lot of energy. I want to just kind of look at how she's managing it, because she's managing it very well. And that's not always the case. Like, especially I know as a follow social dancing, sometimes you get leads that do want to give you just a ton of energy. And if you don't know how to manage it, it's really hard to like feel stable and feel like you are under your own control.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about that.
To the screen share.
So I want to kind of point out here for a second, because usually we talk about like starting with connection and whatnot. And I think we tend to harp on placement of the hand on the back and stuff like that. Benji does not have a hand on her back, but I wanted to point that out because she has an arm wrapped around his neck. And because of the height difference, that's going to make a pretty solid connection for them. And he, even though he doesn't have his hand on her back, he actually is connecting with his arm.
And they're also chest to chest.
Yes, that too. He does a really good job of letting her take the moment to breathe.
Yeah, because what's happening is as she's rotating to her left right here, it looks like she's the one that has an idea to drop, and so she's affecting the handhold, and then he's responding, and like you said, giving her the space for it. And while it isn't necessarily on topic for this evening, one of the things I really enjoy about his pattern choices throughout this dance is how often he changes handhold in a unique way. So right there is a really good example. All right, we have energy.
The first important thing to this is that he is giving her a lot of energy, but he's also giving her a really stable connection to him because he's grabbing further up on the arm. And so he's like able to slowly transition that down
So we have,
And that's just like a really solid connection handhold.
yeah, right to right. Either holding each other's wrists and forearms, or the handshake is so
Mm-hmm.
stable.
Yeah.
Um, and feels a lot more comfortable to apply energy, because then you're essentially bypassing the fingers and the knuckles,
Yeah. Yeah.
which are smaller joints, smaller muscles, therefore weaker, and going straight into the wrist.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So I think that when you're wanting to apply a lot of energy, that's probably the best handhold to go for if you're doing handhold.
Yeah. And then I want to highlight how he is doing the body lead for this
Yeah.
pass. Because what he's doing is a really extended foot strike, with his right foot right here. And if we were over here looking that way, he's very much leaning towards Emily. And so he has created all of this distance for himself with which to accommodate how she ends up following the lead. So after the foot strike, he starts pressing through and shifting his weight to his right foot. And that's what gets her going. And he has this infinite adjustability because of where he had placed his foot. And he takes it a step further by squatting down and putting his head like almost like on her shoulder
Yeah.
metaphorically. It's a really interesting detail, but because of the way he led it, that change in shaping for him isn't negatively impacting the connection.
Mm-hmm.
I also want to add the directionality of what's going on here. So he's shifting weight to his right foot, but his right hand, the trajectory is pretty much straight towards us in the camera. It's going screen left just a little bit, but it's not because he's pulling it there. It's because she is now passing him and she needs more room to her right side for it to be comfortable for her frame. Mm-hmm. He is very much intentionally trying to lead her quickly at the audience, at the judges, which is a very straight shot. And then the hand is moving that way a little bit to accommodate her. It's not part of the lead itself. And that's a really important distinction.
So as she's coming through this rotation here, she pretty immediately starts pitching back with the upper body. And that is pretty key to being able to manage a lot of energy, is being able to be in a pitched position backwards, because it frees up your feet to be able to fall under you as they may, more or less. And then you also are able to resist some of that as well, right? So you're not just getting yanked forward from like an upright position.
Mm-hmm.
That's a huge thing. Like if you're getting energy, you need to not be in an upright position, because you're going to be getting energy just because of, you know, how the frame is and everything. It's going to go to the upper body. So if you're being yanked from your upper body, you're just going to like face plant forward.
Yeah.
And that's not great. So we want to counter that by trying to pitch backwards with the upper body.
Yeah, which may be counterintuitive if, as a follow, you have learned to be responsive.
Right.
And pitching back doesn't mean not be responsive.
Right.
You are actually more responsive and better able to follow in doing what Alicia has been describing.
Because this one's a little different than the one we were just looking at. We have a different handhold, very different positioning from both of them. She looks kind of upright, and she kind of is, but it's not just energy into one point down into the floor, right? She has a foot popped. So because of the way that the handhold is, this isn't quite as aggressive as the first one, but it actually looks almost more so. just because of the way that she's standing and coming out of it. Because it's not quite as the position she's in is that you can't quite resist as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it does look like he's giving her a little bit more energy in this, but that's not necessarily true.
It's also in part an illusion because instead of traveling at the camera, there's no foreshortening, distorting. There's no foreshortening, distorting how far she's traveling. Talking is hard, people.
Mm-hmm. And another thing she does to manage not being quite as resistant to that forward intent is she just kind of allows herself to follow through as like naturally as possible. And that kind of includes her taking a larger step at one point.
Mm-hmm. I think they just progressively get larger.
So she's taking one step kind of at a slightly larger than normal size, and then the second step is a rather large size, especially for her.
Mm-hmm.
And then we go back to a little bit smaller because she's breaking. Because of that large step, she was able to kind of get a little bit more settled back so she could break herself.
Mm-hmm. And then another detail that's really important, just from the leader's perspective, when you're applying this kind of power to the connection, you need to apply a neutralizer or a counter to it at some point. And what he's doing is neutralizing it by lifting up the handhold so that she can swing through, and then he can counter it once she's on the other side of the handhold. He's not just continuing to yeet her the entire time.
Yeah.
Which would be cruel and unusual.
That's a lot of energy that she gets for those turns.
Mm-hmm.
But she doesn't necessarily do anything different. It's more just the amount of power he's giving her. So she's resisting like she should, and it's just giving her a lot of energy for those turns.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see that her arm goes pretty far back before she's able to release it. So that's quite the wind up.
Yeah. And she is resisting into that position, like we've talked a lot before on the show. She's not just relaxing, because you can easily get injured if you overextend in that direction across your shoulder. So she is resisting into that, not only to protect herself, but to like wind at the top, as it were, because then there's a lot of energy to release for that rotation.
Yeah.
And additionally, that kind of lead where it is very much rotational from the prepped from the prepped shoulder, that tends to stay in place for the rotation as opposed to traveling.
Mm-hmm. Andrew said big bowing action.
Yes. And then Benji just, casually sneaks past her and does a yeet.
Yep.
I'll let you talk about it first.
Yeah. I was going to say, so this is different because the first two we were seeing pretty exclusively from hand connection that was getting the amount of power. And this is different because he is getting her also in kind of like rib cage area. And so he's able to send quite a lot more energy with that, and it can feel even more unstable when you have it from two different spots. And so this, because she's also not really traveling a huge distance, but she's getting a lot of energy. So what she does with it, instead of being able to travel with it like previous, she takes it and she continues the momentum downward because it would be very hard to just like stop.
Mm-hmm. The energy has to go somewhere.
Yeah.
And similar to that very first side pass to the audience that we looked at, Benji is leading her very much straight and releasing her straight. And the slight rotation towards the end is to accommodate her as opposed to part of the original lead. Because if he were to release later and have more rotation to it, she wouldn't end up shooting straight at the camera. She would be ending up over here. And then because Emily is so small, I just want to highlight where his forearm is on her back, because it's really important that you're applying that kind of lead to structural points. So you want to be definitely closer to the shoulder blades than to the waist overall. When you're leading a follow this small, that's kind of the same place. So it doesn't really matter. But on someone like me, it really does matter. There's a huge difference. You don't want to be applying all of that force towards the waist, because then the waist moves before the upper body moves. And it's harder to move as one piece as a follow, and it can be dangerous for the spine. So make sure as a leader that if you're going to be doing this kind of closed position yeet, that you're closer to the shoulder blades than the waist when you're applying that pressure.
And the other thing I want to point out with Benji, like, he's doing a really good job of making sure he's there to counter the energy that he's giving her. Like that's a big thing. A lot of leads will give you the energy, but then not counter it.
Yeah. Or they'll counter late. So the way Benji's leading it, there's no neutral ever. Neutral is a point in time that you're passing through like that. There isn't, you're not hanging out there. No. He's going from tension in his right hand to tension in his left hand. And there's no neutral.
Yeah. And he understands just how much energy he's giving her, because he is like kind of squatting and leaning back into it, right? And even then you can see he kind of even slightly moves forward.
Yep. So his left foot is picking up and adjusting just a little bit to brace a little bit better. And he's extending his arm, and he is trying to squat away from her to counter, but there ends up not being enough rope. So he ends up coming towards her just a little bit to give her the room to finish her movement. All together. I also just love the way she did her squat. It was really elegant. All right. Do you want to talk about any of that?
I was just going to say all of it's really nice. Like, in terms of what we're looking at, it's not as much energy. It's just kind of like a consistent, strong amount of energy. But he also has a really solid handhold with her again. So it doesn't necessarily look like there's a lot of energy and weight between the two of them, but there definitely is.
Right. And it's more together and grounded as opposed to trying to travel with it. Yeah. So like I was talking about at the very beginning, how much I love that they're taking moments to pause, to breathe. And one of the easy signifiers of that is that she's getting an entire anchor without having to travel anywhere.
Yeah.
And oftentimes when partnerships get into that go, 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 fast and very furious West Coast swing, a follow will have one count in an anchored position. They'll be rebounding out of it really quickly. just over and over and over and over again. That's exhausting to do, also exhausting to watch.
Yep. So this is probably the next thing I want to talk about. So this is all nice. And then because of the positions that they're both in, he kind of like leans and squats at the same time to counter not only her directional intent away, but her directional intent upwards in a way. Because if he were to just like move straight out of this, like straight to the side, it would be really hard to get her out of it because of how much weight she's giving. And also that weight is going kind of up and away, not so much just away.
Yeah, it's very much kind of stretching that way towards the lights.
So because of this, he really needs a good amount of energy to get her out, especially because coming into this, like he pretty much when he goes into like a split weight position, like he is now stopped. So he doesn't have a ton of energy to just kind of transfer to her and move. So it's going to be harder for him to get her out of that.
And part of mechanically what is making that kind of pitch extra hard to break and redirect is because she is perpendicular to him. When you're trying to get a follow to break this line and go across it, is harder than if a follow were just pitched straight backwards and you were trying to bring them forward over their toes.
Yeah.
So like what he does, he wants to bring her back like equal and opposite. But another option that you could do as a leader is rotate really quickly to your right and do like a rotational lead to get her to go forward out of this in a walking arc. Like that's another way to get out of that position. And so it just kind of depends. You need to understand how much power and grounding getting a follow out of a certain position requires. That was a complete thought. I just intonated the end of it as if it weren't. I always do that.
I also wanted to point out, though, that when he does bring her out of it, like he's not moving the handhold like height. He's just moving the direction that he has his end of it because her end is already going a little diagonally upwards. And you can see his is not initially. So he doesn't move the actual height of the handhold between the two of them, but he moves his arm.
It's so nice. Like that's what makes following something just feel effortless and enjoyable and like you're dancing instead of having to manage so many variables.
Yeah. And then when he comes out, or as she comes out of it, he is continuing to move her towards him, but then he goes into a nice, like, really wide stance so that he can then counter her in compression because she was so aggressively leaned one way, so it's going to end up in a very similar amount of weight going the other way.
Yep. And while it looks like he's not actually putting his forearm on his thigh, it's close enough that if he were to need it for extra support, he could use it. So that's a good like muscle memory thing to do as a leader.
It looks like he kind of has it in like the hip pocket.
Yeah, the crook of his hip.
Yeah.
But it's a very handy tool if you need more strength. Like you might just be someone who is not that strong, and that's fine. And that's what I do. I'll use my legs and my hips to brace my arm and the handhold to have more strength. It's very sneaky. And it also means that to lead out of it instead of using your arm muscles, because your arm is attached to the larger body point. You can actually just drive through it with your legs, and that's how you lead out of it.
Yep.
And then similarly, while the hand is coming upwards to help get her out of this more pitched position, this kind of lunged position, it doesn't go higher than this before he starts bringing her back in again. So she's getting a little bit of a yo-yo sensation, but not so much that it's whiplash.
Right. Yeah.
And the way he reaches with his right arm, so that way her rib cage can run into his arm, her rib cage and back as fast as possible. So that way she feels super secure.
Yeah.
Going into this way support.
Yeah. Like dips and things, it's going to feel more comfortable for the follow if you're reaching towards them initially and let them run into you first, so that they have support for longer on things like that. Because a lot of times we kind of just get like almost a trust fall feel.
Yeah. It's not fun.
It's not comfortable.
And then lastly, I just want to highlight how far Benji is taking his left foot. So he's hooking behind, and then he's doing another way out ahead of them in the slot step with his left foot. So that way there's plenty of room for their shared center to travel down the slot.
Yeah.
And if you think how tiny Emily is and how much he's traveling for her to feel comfortable doing that,
right,
you have to do that so much more traveling the taller the follow. Which is why when we've watched Roro lead Bryn and do the same pattern, he's literally leaping to travel down the slot far enough for it to be comfortable for her. And the way this right here, we have like a literal breath. So they come up out of this, and then you can see that particularly Benji have this moment of pause and then a sigh as they ground down into their next weight transfers.
Yeah.
And that's another example of the pause and breath, this time quite literally, that I love so much in this dance.
And I like that when he gets to that lunge, he doesn't like force her into anything.
She does a really good job because I think she's ready to go.
Yeah, I think so.
But she stops herself because she realizes from the handhold connection and his eye contact that he wants her to stay a little bit longer.
Yeah.
And that's a really important skill to have as a follow-up. Be like, oh, we're not going yet? Cool.
And it also gives her a moment to be able to pitch back instead of being so forward. So this is like a ton of energy.
And it's very just similar structurally to the very first thing we saw towards the audience earlier, but we just have a different perspective.
Yep. And with this, just because of the way that she's going into it, she's not quite as pitched back when he gives her that initial energy. Right? Because she is pitched back here, but then she's kind of up over herself a little bit when you see him kind of getting that pulling to move her. So she's not able to resist quite as much with the upper body. And so what she naturally wants to do to come to a stop with this one is get into that like power pose with the feet, really wide stance. And that's a good way to manage energy if you get it when you aren't initially just like pitched back, right? You get to the end and you want to make sure you're not trying to land with your feet underneath you. You want to make sure you're landing with your feet rather wide.
And then afterwards, it resolves in a full anchor. So even though it's
Mm-hmm.
one weight transfer in time, it's a full anchor. And it's
Yeah.
just so relaxing instead of like chest popping. Go!
Yeah.
I also love how she's letting the chest pop kind of come up through her neck and head a little bit and through
Hmm.
her arm. So it isn't perfectly isolated. It's flowing more.
Yeah.
It's really beautiful.
All of this is pretty minimal energy wise until we get to right here. And then you can see he's trying to give her a lot of energy. And because of her being, he's not making her travel a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So that energy isn't necessarily doing a ton. Like, I think kind of the energy he gives her here is more just for that faster movement rather than like traveling, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I would agree.
so it's not quite as prolonged when he's leading her through it. It's a shorter burst.
Yeah. It's in order to hit a pose sooner so you can be there longer
Mm-hmm.
and still be
Yeah.
on time. It's using acceleration for emphasis,
Yeah.
but without the added traveling momentum.
Yeah. And she does a good job with it because he is still giving her a good amount of energy, but she kind of dissipates it by going up and then down. I really appreciate how like smoothly he moves through all of that. It's not like rushed. He's just kind of taken both of their time to figure out where they're at and what can we get to next.
Yeah, and whenever he has the opportunity, he increases the points of connection.
Mm-hmm.
So as soon as he has this moment right here, both hands are
Yeah.
seeking connection points, shoulder and hips.
Love this moment.
So good. I love how both Forrest and Ben Morris just absolutely lose it. They're synchronized over on the left, and
So that whole drag required a lot of energy, but it's not quite the same because like she's not resisting anything in this particular movement.
no, she's
Like
just
what's
trying to maintain
resisting,
her positioning. So
right?
like engaging her back into the connection, keeping her core straight so her pelvis is level and her legs can be straight. Like
Mm-hmm.
if you think planking is hard, try
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. And what's hard, what's like resisting for her is that downward weight that she has just based on the fact that it's a dip. And that's what's resisting the really aggressive energy that he's giving because he has to move her.
Yeah. Because to do this statically would actually be harder than
Yeah,
traveling it. And then what makes the illusion, because it almost looks like she's falling and he's
it
catching her.
does. Yeah.
But if you watch, he is getting that upper hand hold as soon as possible, and he's going for the wrist so she feels safe to change connection points.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see how many frames there are before he lets go of her back with his right hand.
Yeah.
And he's bracing his left upper arm and elbow against his rib cage.
Mm-hmm.
So that way it's not just his bicep resisting her as she does this illusion of a trust fall.
I love the intense face he has going too.
I know. I think the thing that's most impressive is he is practiced enough to do these really complex connection changes without looking at where he's connecting with his hands. He's able to just engage with the audience the whole time while he does this illusion work with his hands. And speaking of faces, like this is a really emotionally powerful song, and they're not being angsty about it at all. They're just being willing to take the movement seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And then that to me conveys the emotion better than trying to caricaturize emotion. Yeah. Let's watch it one more time because it's so fun. Scramble.
Said this is such a pretty frame.
and then Forrest and Benmo just lose their minds. I mean, as they should. It's just they're in sync with each other and wearing the same shirt. It just makes it so much better. Can more leaders hold the back of Follow's head? There's just something. Yeah, like I know I do that a lot for certain types of dips. And because you can easily give a little bit more space if the follow wants to relax their head back more, but then they're just like completely supported. And I know when I follow and a leader does that for me, it feels so good.
Andrew said my knees hurt just watching this. Yeah.
Theme.
I love after they have that really intense drag, drop, and coming up, they then go back to just literally doing like nothing.
Connected and present. So good. Oh my God, her smile is making my day.
Smile of a follow that just had an amazing dance.
True story. And Emily, in case you're watching this and you haven't seen any of our other stuff, Sarah Van Drake, something very lovely to say about you in our interview with her. So I think that was towards the end of the episode. So go have thou a watch in case no one informed you of this thing.
All right. Well, I think that's everything for tonight. This is probably the shortest episode we've done in a long time.
I know, but it
and
felt
we're
really
only
good.
Like 9 minutes early.
Yeah, I know, but it felt juicy.
It did, yeah.
No, I like it. I'm here for it. Again, I will be at Swingtacular, and I will be available for 30-minute private lessons because with my elastomeric mask, it's hard to speak and project through it for long without getting faint. So 30-minute lessons. And then while I live in Portland and I'm always available here, Alicia does not. And Alicia will be here in Portland, Oregon for the first couple of weeks of August. So
yes.
Hit her up, please.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us. Don't know that we know what our episode is for next time. So
we might film it in person. Who knows? That would be weird. It might happen.
We will see you next time.